talking with guest Dylan Code with the California Superbike School that has existed for now 44 years. How are you, Dylan?
Very good, very good.
Is that right? I mean, I think, is it your dad that started this back in like 80?
Yeah, 1980, he started it. He was doing some one-on-one coaching back in 1976 and then decided to quit racing and then start training.
What kind of racing was your dad doing that led to all the training?
Well, the main thing was superbikes, and superbikes was a relatively new class in racing, which is essentially taking a high-powered street bike and then further modifying it. And it was more of a sort of a passion craftsmanship type thing because back in those days, there really wasn't a whole lot of aftermarket accessories that you could have for your motorcycles. A lot of that had to be hand built. So these bikes were unique in that they were all a bit different, and everyone had their own little formula for making their bikes better.
I think it's interesting that you start the school about 4 years before Kawasaki puts the Ninja on the market. And I think most people that think about these kind of things kind of think about that sort of a bike on the street or modifying something like that. What were they using prior to that sort of thing?
There were a few very specific models that came out that were real game changers. Kawasaki, as a manufacturer, had two. One of them was the H1, which was a two-stroke street bike, which was very powerful for its day and age.
Sure.
And then a little later on, they came out with the Z1, a four-cylinder, 900cc sport bike, and it doesn't look like a sport bike by today's standards, but
right.
the engine was very robust and could be modified to produce an enormous amount of horsepower over what it did in showroom trim. So it became a favorite amongst a number of competitors, and they even use them in drag race bikes. So they would double, triple, quadruple the horsepower out of those motors. Of course, they didn't last very long, but they could give you some good power for at least a short period of time.
Well, the two-stroke, MotoGP and all that the two-stroke has now faded away. I'm sure you got some time on one. What were they like to ride for those of us that never got to touch that?
Well, I started racing two strokes really as the first type of bikes that I rode. And the two strokes, the motors, they generate a relatively high amount of power for their size, mainly because every time the piston goes up, it fires, whereas on a four-stroke, every other time the piston goes up, it fires. So you're able to get more power out of the same size, generally speaking. And they were a bit temperamental, two-stroke motors, not entirely, and they still make them today, and they're far more reliable and user-friendly. But back then, they definitely had a power characteristic where they didn't really make much power until the revs got up really high, and then suddenly they made a bunch of power. So you had this very narrow window. You had this very narrow window to get the power that you wanted, and below that it just sort of bogged. And then if you exceeded the RPM, then the power just went flat. So it was a kind of a balancing act.
It sounds like you're either riding a motorcycle or it's trying to kill you. It's one or the other.
Yeah, or the person's trying to kill themselves, even though they don't know it because it's so much fun. But I guess that's the allure of riding a motorcycle. Is it's one of these things. It's kind of like a snake. If someone sees a snake out on a trail, they stop. They keep their distance, but they're fascinated. And people seem to be fascinated with anything that's dangerous. And okay, this is a little bit different than a snake, but there's all these other romantic notions tied in with it, and adventure, and whatever someone identifies as having street credit, or just being the daredevil. And so there's a lot of different things tied up with this idea, and in riding motorcycle means so many different things to so many different people. But I think the fact that it is dangerous is one of the transformative elements connected with it, because when you're doing it, it really demands all of your attention. And if you don't give it your full attention, then the penalties are rather great.
I love you associating with snakes. I've always been a fan of snakes, but motorcycles are similar in that not everybody wants to touch them or have anything to do with them. And they
Right.
can bite you if you don't respect them, for sure. That's
Yeah.
a great analogy, really. The
But
whole
yeah, I
snake
guess it's
thing.
just from the, yeah, it's just in, and again, motorcycle has a lot more to offer to a person than a snake, but
Yeah,
the,
yeah.
you, it's just the idea of people are fascinated with anything that's dangerous, even if someone doesn't like guns or whatever. If they do see one, let's say at someone's house, they are, is it loaded? Can I hold it? They're still interested.
Snakes and guns and motorcycles. We're talking about all my favorite stuff here. I mean,
There you go.
motorcycles are something you can't get out of your blood. It seems that once it is part of you, it's a drug to me. I try to ride every night. I have numerous bikes. It's just something you have to live at this point for me.
Yeah, it's hard to convey that feeling, that freedom of riding a motorcycle, because it's got sensation, it's got freedom, it's got danger, it's got whatever romantic notions that you might have
Mm-hmm.
piled in there. So it's a whole package. And to be perfectly honest, it's not for everyone. And the risk, depending on the scenario, can be very high. And in some cases, the risk versus reward ratio just isn't good and shouldn't be taken as an option. But I think if the person does as much as they can to mitigate the risks and can pull out all the enjoyment that they can get, then then it makes sense. Then go ahead and do it.
That's true. Well, I'm 50, and I distinctly remember a neighbor down the street. He was an old man, and he had this rule about he never encouraged anyone to ride a motorcycle. If they latched on it themselves, that was fine. But he never wanted it on his conscience that he encouraged someone to ride. Have you ever had that thought or
Oh,
kind of
I
lived
feel
like that?
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel exactly the same. And as a matter of fact, I say, hey, we're a motorcycle school. We get people actually off the street, and they get to ride with us on a racetrack, which is actually safer because no one's coming the other way, and it's
Yep.
nice and wide, and there's nothing to hit. But I say we give junkies clean needles. In essence, we're not running
Yeah.
around.
Yeah.
We're not running around saying, hey, try this. But if you have made that choice to go ride a motorcycle, then we'll help you become more in control and safer. But I'm not going to go around shouting from the rooftops that everyone needs to go ride motorcycles. So we just need to be there and available for people if they decide to do it. But I get friends that ask me, what I do, or meet somebody at a party. I say, well, I do motorcycle training, and they go, oh wow, I've always thought I'd like to ride a motorcycle. I say, well, look, probably not a good idea unless you can really devote yourself to riding almost as a craft, as something that is a serious hobby that you really immerse yourself in and find out all about and become quite competent. Otherwise, if you're just sort of an occasional fair weather rider and you don't have that experience, something bad is possible to happen, or let's say the likelihood is higher.
You hit on it right there, because I rode for the police department for years, writing tickets and, escorting the president and all that kind of good stuff. And that was full-time job. And the state police decided to add some bikes that was a part-time job where they would ride a few hours a day. And we always said, that's dangerous if somebody's not committed to this constantly. And sure enough, one of the state troopers got killed on an escort, which they weren't doing a lot of. And that was the end of their bike program. So you're so right on that. You've commit to this thing or not.
Right. I would love to learn how to fly a plane. I don't have the wherewithal or the time to do it. But when I looked into just what it would take, I just realized that the commitment in order to be a competent pilot and the frequency required was something that I couldn't support. And I just went, well, it just doesn't fit right now. It's not something that I can pursue and feel good about.
I came to the same conclusion trying to get a pilot's license. Definitely. So the name California Superbike School, does not mean you have to go to California to participate, correct?
Yeah, it's almost misleading, but I guess a good example of that would be California Pizza Kitchen.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
something that started in California, but I think they've got stores all over the world, and we do have branches all over the world. So we are actually the world's largest motorcycle track school, and it started just in Southern California, and we had no real ideas of expanding beyond that. And when I say we, I'm really more referring to my father because I was rather young when we started, but we expanded to Northern California. It was still California, but then in our second year, we went back east to a few venues. And then from that point forward, it stuck. We just started going all over the United States. And then about 20 years after that, no, anyway, 15 years or so, we got requests in foreign areas, specifically in the United Kingdom and Australia, and we opened up foreign branches there. And then they spread out and went to other countries in Europe or in the Asia, Australia area. And that's the way it's been ever since. So yeah, we are actually international and have been for quite some time.
Is communication a little bit of a challenge? I mean, if I had to go teach a school in Japan, I'd have a hard time.
So yeah, we arrange for translators, and we'll do schools like in India. We've been to China before.
Wow.
Malaysia, Thailand. I remember being in Thailand and doing everything with a translator who didn't know how to ride a motorcycle. So it was an interesting thing. It was a woman who was a very good translator, but I had to give her a little sort of seminar on what we're going to be talking about and answer her questions, so she had a good idea how to then relay it to these riders. And we run into some situations where it's a little tricky, but everyone's there to have fun. Everyone's so optimistic, and it ends up working out, and it always has. It's great.
Do you find that sometimes this stuff is more popular than even in the United States? I mean, I'm a big like ZX7 guy, and like everybody and their grandma owns one in England, and you can't find two of them to rub together in the United States. I mean, is it just a bigger deal in some places?
Yeah, it is. And I think that motorsports tends to mirror whatever is going on in that particular geographic area. And what I mean by that is if you are in an area of the country that's rather flat and doesn't have mountains or twisty sections, they just have stoplights, then you're going to find they're into drag racing there, which makes sense because it mirrors what they do. If it's in Northern Europe, they do a lot of rally car driving because that's similar to what they end up riding on, dirt roads or roads covered with snow or things like that. And then of course, if you're in the Southeast, it's going to be, lifted trucks and mud bogs because they get mud down there. Yeah. And if it's the Southwest, it's going to be more your off-road type stuff, your trophy trucks or motocross bikes. But it just tends to mirror whatever happens to be going on by default from the geography. So you also find that in foreign countries, the necessity to ride a motorcycle is very real because they're so congested that you have to ride a motorcycle. Otherwise, you're not going to get around. And also the economics. If you have someone who doesn't have enough money to buy a car, well, they can get a scooter, and then they make their way around on that. And not only is it quick, it's not so expensive, and it's easy to park, things like that. So it does seem to match what's going on in that area. And in Southern California, you get a lot of canyons, so the sport bike scene is pretty prominent here.
Oh, it's awesome. So one of the most amazing videos that I've run across in recently is this one of Wayne Rainey, of course, the guy that got paralyzed, the famous motorcycle racer, and he's back on a bike. They put him back on a specialized, his old bike, I guess. Have you seen the video? And yeah. Doesn't his career go back to the California Superbike school?
Yeah. So Wayne Rainey is a 3-time world champion, and I believe it was 1991 and 92.
Yep.
And he was a dirt track racer in Southern California, and he was picked up by at that time Kawasaki to. They basically tapped him to become a road racer, and they wanted to see if he could make it. So they sent him to the California Superbike School. The second time he ever got on a motorcycle, on a road race bike on a track, right? So his second experience was with us, and my father started training him, coaching him one-on-one. So that was in 1980, I believe, or 81. And then by 1983, he had won his first American Superbike championship, and then went on to race in Europe, and then eventually 3 world championships. But I remember Wayne when he was I was younger than him, but I remember when he was just a late teenager, really friendly guy. And yeah, it was really tragic news when he became paralyzed from a crash in a race, but he stuck with it, and he came back around and started took over basically the American road racing scene with Moto America, and he's been helping a lot of other racers make their way up the ranks and eventually over into the world level. And it's his passion. It's something that he follows. And yeah, he did have that opportunity to get back on his bike that was modified so that he could ride it without the use of his legs, which is and of course, people are going to have mixed feelings about that. Coming back to the machine that basically changed your life in a major way. But it's also, I think, probably liberating in a certain way of just getting back on the horse. And I think in today's day and age, disabilities seem to be far less of an issue. People are able to work their way around it and still enjoy their lives. And I think he's an inspiration to a lot of people.
Oh, he definitely is. Who is your ideal candidate for the California Superbike School?
We are really training your average street rider, someone who knows how to ride a motorcycle. They already know. They're not brand new. They know how to ride. Maybe they ride on the weekends and play around, on some twisty roads if they want to from time to time. But the number of just average everyday riders we get is really the vast majority of our clientele. There are people who are more devoted to the track. They go to the track all the time, and then they want to improve their game. They'll come to us. And then we also get some people who have aspirations to be racers, and we do actually train racers all the way up to the point where they're winning championships. So our graduates have actually won 103 world and national championships over the years. So we can also do that, but that's not our main specialty.
Right. So you've got like different levels that people learn, correct? Like if I would love to go to the school, but I would start in like the base or number 1, correct?
Yeah. So there's 4 levels, and the levels don't refer to your speed or particular ability. They just refer to a package of exercises. And you could, in a sense, you could actually do them randomly, these levels, because they're just different packages. We don't have people do them that way, but they're not for someone who's not so good a rider to someone who's better or even better than that. It's really more of, hey, this is a package. Like level 1 mainly concerns itself with what you're doing with the controls. Level 2 mainly concerns itself with what you're doing with your eyes, your vision. Level 3 mainly concerns itself with what you're doing with your body in relation to the motorcycle. And then level 4 becomes a customized program that doesn't have a set lesson plan. It's really more just specifically tailored to that individual rider.
I got you.
So everyone starts at level 1, whether they happen to be have a racer aspirations or if they're just a Harley rider that wants to get a little better in the twisties.
And you could ride your own motorcycle through this school, correct?
Yes, our sponsor now and has been since 2010 is BMW of North America, and they came out with a really strong contender in the sport bike world with their S1000RR. So it's a 1000cc 4-cylinder sport bike that makes almost 200 horsepower, and it's a real sort of fighter jet of a motorcycle. And we have a whole fleet of those. We have 32 of them that we use, and our students can come in and rent them. They can just arrive and hop on the bike and they ride it for a day and then they go home. or they can bring their own bike and ride their own bike in the class. And, I could argue both sides.
Sure.
Ride our bike because it's something really neat, and it's a real refined machine. It's also a chance to just check that out if you're not really used to that type of bike. Or you could ride your own bike, which is the bike you're normally riding, and it's good to train on that. So there's an argument in both sides. But the great part about it is this: if someone is on one part of the country and they want to come out to, let's say, California or the Northeast or someplace far away from where they normally live, they don't have to take anything along with them. They can just show up, because we have the helmet, boots, leathers, everything. You can just show up in your street clothes and you're ready to go. We provide everything.
I rode the BMW on the police department. I really do like their motorcycles. Now, if you don't have a lot of experience and you're getting on this S1000 with 200 horsepower, are there some kind of safety features in the computer or the program that you could tone the thing down or something to that effect?
Yeah. With all the new sport bikes, and specifically with the BMW, you've got different modes that you can select. So you can make the bike have a power characteristic of like a 600 twin cylinder bike with a very, very smooth delivery, something quite docile, actually. And then you can change the mode. So really you can dial whether or not you want a pussycat or a roaring lion underneath you, and you can dial it up or dial it down. And we haven't found that to be a problem with riders at all. The bike getting away from them. Normally their fear will override any stupidity. And because if you do uncork it and twist the throttle, the bike will go immediately. And that triggers fear in people pretty fast, even grown men who consider themselves alpha. So we really don't see people getting in trouble on those bikes. And being BMWs, and even like a BMW car, they're just smooth, user-friendly. They're not particularly fierce in any way unless you apply the throttle in a way that will let it go. But other than that, they're very unintimidating. We've had people as short as 5'2" ride them, or even 5'1" ride them. Big people. We've had a very wide age range, all the way up to some students in their early 80s. So it's a great tool for us, and it seems to. Of course, there's no one size fits all motorcycle, but one size, at least this bike, fits many.
Well, I'm sure BMW loves being a part of your program. How many students end up switching to the BMW? I'm sure it happens.
Yeah, it happens. And I think that it happens a lot. We get feedback, hey, I did your school and I went out and bought the motorcycle. But it's one of these things, if someone was going to go out and do some training and they use a piece of equipment and the training went well and they like that piece of equipment, they're probably going to buy it. They might even know in the back of their mind there could be a better piece of equipment out there, but they're not going to take that chance. They're going to go with the one they know. Let's say someone goes to a pistol class and they have a certain brand and caliber, and they do that for 2 days, and by the end of that, they really like that pistol. They know how to use that. And are they going to be just so eager to then go buy something else? And even though it might be better, but it also might be worse. And you want something you can rely on. So sometimes people say, "Hey, what's the best motorcycle to buy?" I'd say, "Well, the one that you know how to use, or the one you're most comfortable with. That would probably be the best one."
That's true.
Yeah.
I just bought the ZX10, and to be honest, I'm kind of scared of it. I've been riding my whole life. That bike's scary. A little bit.
Yeah. Well, the ZX10, and there have been different models of it, but you can do all of the 1000s will do right at about 100 miles an hour in first gear.
Oh, easily.
And
easily.
Yeah. And on the street, that can get away. I mean, you can get yourself thrown in jail.
Yeah.
Pretty quickly.
Pretty fast.
In no time at all. And if it's not jail, you get yourself, badly hurt or worse. So it's definitely something that requires an enormous amount of respect. But I do think people love the fact that they could if they wanted to.
Oh yeah, of
Is
course.
someone going to use? You have these Mopar cars that have these motors. I think it's the Hellcat
Oh, the
motor.
Hellcat, of course, or the Demon.
Yeah,
That's the big one.
right. And
Yeah,
then okay, it's got whatever it's got, somewhere between 700 and 1,000 horsepower,
sure.
and I think people like the idea that they've got all that power. They could go from 40 miles an hour to 80 miles an hour in the blink of an eye. How often are they doing that? Not often, but I think they just like the idea that they could whenever they want, and maybe they do it from time to time, but they're probably not going to be going 190 miles an hour down the interstate very often.
Well, and plus it's the CDI factor. Chicks dig it. I mean, you got to have, you got to have that.
Right.
Hey, yeah, I keep getting ads for these body worn airbags that motorcycle riders are wearing. Is this tech pretty new, and have you seen it work?
So it's not that new, and I have seen it work. So air vests specifically have started to get. They go back quite a bit, and the technology was pretty basic. In the earliest days, it was a vest that had an air bladder in it, and it had a cartridge, like a big CO2 cartridge, and it had a tether to the bike. So if the rider separated from the bike, the tether would activate the release of the CO2, and then it would fill up the airbag, and then the person would have an air cushion around their torso, which was a great start. And it started to get more and more sophisticated, where they have, instead of a tether to the bike, they have an accelerometer in the
Wow.
electronics of it. So if it notices the rider is doing something that seems like a crash, in other words, they're suddenly twisting in a way that they would never twist if they were riding a motorcycle,
Right.
then it'll deploy. And what they've got is about 20 years of machine learning experience. So someone crashes, and then they can look at the data because it'll record what happened. They're always recording when you're riding. And then if it deploys, then it'll save that section, so that when it goes resets, the airbag gets refilled, right, with the cartridge. Then they'll know what the circumstances are. And then also, if it was a false deployment, then the person can say, hey, this went off, but it shouldn't have. And they'll look at the parameters of that. And as the data gets added to and added to and added to, then the algorithms become smarter and smarter and smarter. The company that we use is Alpine Stars. There are other companies for sure, but they seem to be at or near the cutting edge of the technology. And they've been using these computer learning models, this machine learning models for I think 20 years now. And the racers now in the world level are all required to wear these airbags, these air vests.
Oh,
And quite often,
yeah.
And you'll see a rider go through a corner and lose traction on the rear tire, and then suddenly regain traction in a way that it snaps the rider off the bike and pitches them up in the air. And very often, the algorithms will notice that, and they'll deploy the air vest before the rider even gets up all the way up in the air. Just on their way up. On their way up, they deploy, and then, of course, on the way down, it's there, and it can absorb as much as 90% of the impact force. There's an interesting story, and this is very recent. There was a woman who's one of our students who happens to have osteoporosis. She doesn't let that stop her, and she has an air vest. She was on a tour in Italy, and we're talking just 3 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
Something happened. Her right-of-way was violated, and she ended up going over the bars of her motorcycle.
Oh man!
And landing on her back. Now this is a female, older female with osteoporosis, and she walked away just bruised and continued her ride.
That is awesome.
So that gives you an idea of how effective they can be. And there are some racers who are known to crash quite a bit. Mark Marquez at the MotoGP level, he's got over 140 crashes in his career. since he went to the world level. I don't know what that is, but prior to that, and he's definitely been injured, but he's still racing.
Oh yeah.
And if someone's crashed 140 times, you'd expect them to, have visited the morgue 10 times over, but no. And he's had difficulty in one crash where he broke his arm, and that's created quite a bit of difficulty. But he's still racing, and he's racing this season, and he's had a number of podiums. And I'd say the chances of him being in his current state of health without the airbags is close to zero. So they're definitely going to be a big part of riding in the future. They already are, and it's catching on very, very quickly, but it's going to be a major part of motorcycle rider protection moving forward.
Whatever it costs, it sounds like it's definitely worth it.
Yeah, they're usually around 1,000. Some you can get for about 700, but in that sort of $500 to $1,000 price range, which is steep, especially for someone who doesn't have a whole lot of money. Maybe they're just coming out of school and they have a motorcycle because they're inexpensive. So a choice like that is very difficult to make. But when you're flying through the air going, oh no, this isn't going to be good, you're going to really wish you had that. Yeah. And anyone who's had to spend time doing physical therapy knows that that just sucks. Or sitting on the couch with your arm in a sling, waiting for something to heal up.
Oh, big time. Now, speaking of technology, I wanted to ask you about, you have some specialized bikes with the California Superbike School that I guess are used to teach certain things: the lean bike, slide bike, braking bike, video bike, no BS bike. What is that? What are these things?
Okay, so we've got a couple bikes that have outriggers on them. One of them is the panic brake bike. So someone can ride along and apply the brakes so hard that the front end locks up, and the bike typically will tilt to one side or the other rather rapidly, and it has those outriggers there to hold you up. But what that allows the rider to do is experience what it's like to go over the limit, braking too hard and locking up that front tire, and just understand the dynamics. How does the bike feel? And again, just where is the limit? How hard do you have to squeeze the lever before something bad happens? And that is a real great training tool, because it allows someone to experience something that they normally would never be able to experience. We have another bike with outriggers, which we use for body position. And essentially it has we have the rider go in a perpetual circle in a large paved area, and we'll look at their body position and then make corrections. But the outriggers basically stabilize the bike so that the rider isn't bobbing up and down, which can happen, especially if they're trying out new things. Mm-hmm. We also have a version of that same bike that we use where we get the rider to make a turn and then apply the throttle enough to get the rear tire to start spinning or lose traction. Now, this is pretty dangerous, because when it regains traction, it usually does that abruptly and will pitch the rider off the bike. So these arms, they articulate and they have dampers in them so that it will slow down that sudden standing up that the bike will do sometimes when it loses traction, then regains traction. We don't use that one all the time, just because it's not crash proof. There's a certain amount of danger involved in that. We've got a video bike where we have riders ride around the track, and it video records the rider from a boom up over your shoulder. So it's kind of looking over your shoulder. And it also has a data overlay, which tells you exactly what the rider's doing with the brakes and the throttle, what gear they're in, their speed, what RPM. And this is reviewed with a coach who will look very closely at all the elements of what the rider is doing and be able to give them very focused feedback on specifically what they're doing. And in some cases, the rider might be able to perhaps argue, no, I think I was doing this with the throttle, but the data shows very, very clearly exactly what the rider is doing. So these little arguments, or the person is in a little bit of denial, saying, no, I didn't think that's exactly what happened, because sometimes you can't quite tell, you can't quite hear with the audio, you don't know exactly what's happening. This lays everything to bear.
What's a no BS bike?
We made a bike that has a regular set of handlebars, just like any motorcycle, but we made a secondary set of handlebars that are solid mounted to the frame. So these handlebars, they don't move in any direction. And what we have riders do is they'll get the bike going straight in a large paved area, and they'll take the hands off the regular handlebars and then grab the secondary set of handlebars, which are fixed. They don't do anything. And we say, well, go ahead and shift your weight around, or try to body steer, BS, body steer, and see how much you can affect the bike's direction by shifting your weight around. Often riders get the idea that shifting their weight around will have a dramatic effect on the bike's change of direction. But as it turns out, it's not very dramatic at all. It's actually quite minor. And of course, this depends on the speed, the weight of the motorcycle, and the weight of the rider, et cetera. But almost uniformly, someone gets on that bike, take their hands off the regular handlebars, grab the fixed bars, which have a working throttle on them, shift their weight around, and notice that it doesn't really do very much at all.
I could see that. I could see that. And then you've done it. You know.
Right, yeah. Because people can argue and they can say, no, this is how I do it. And you go, well, you might be actually, when you shift your weight, you might be pushing on the bars a little bit and think that the weight shift was the thing that got the bike to change direction, whereas it actually was more the handlebars. And that's the main thing that we're trying to say, is that while we can definitely influence the motorcycle's direction by shifting our weight, the only quick and accurate way of getting the bike steered would be via the handlebars. So I'm not saying you can't do it. It's just saying it's not quick and accurate.
I'm just curious. When I went, I was very blessed to get to go to the police instructor school in Florida for a couple of weeks. And if you had made it through that, like, the hardest next level thing was being able to do those exercises without using the brakes. Is there any version of that in riding super bikes where you, I guess, try to use RPMs of gears and slowing down and maybe try to learn to do some of this without being heavy on the brakes?
Not really. I mean, especially in performance riding, the brakes are an important component in really allowing the rider to get the exact speed that they're hoping for. With that being said, we do have an exercise where we have the riders ride around the track in one gear without using the brakes. And that's not necessarily a good way to ride in general, but what it does do is it helps the rider sharpen and develop their sense of speed. Because we find riders will often overslow for corners, and in some cases, some people will underslow for corners, but that in many instances will be traced back to just a poor sense of speed. The rider comes up to the corner with the general idea of how it's supposed to be, and if they overslow, well, then they're disappointed. And anyone who overslows for a corner will tend to go back to the throttle, in some cases too aggressively or too early in the corner, and push the bike out wide. So the no brakes element will just help someone sharpen and develop their sense of speed. But in the performance riding context, the brakes are very, very important to getting the exact speed the rider is hoping for. Now, if you're on a twisty road that goes uphill and everything's about the same speed, probably not using the brakes very much. So it's not like you need to use the brake in every corner. But let's say we have a twisty road that goes steeply uphill. Someone's not using the brakes very much going uphill, but when they turn around and go downhill, they'd probably be using them quite a bit. So it's not an always or never scenario, but it's having the skill and being adaptable, being able to adjust one's speed just by closing the throttle does have its uses.
I rode the Harley Livewire not long ago, and I noticed real quick I could ride this thing all over town and never, ever touch a brake, because the second you let off of the juice, I guess the regenerative element starts slowing the bike down. When I got to thinking, well, nobody behind me has seen a brake light for 20 minutes.
Right. I drove one of our students came to the school with a Rivian, one of those Rivian trucks.
Yes.
And he said, yeah, you want to drive it? Check it out. I said, okay, fine. So I just drove it around in the paddock. And I like how much power, the torque is so immediate. But when I lift it off the accelerator, it really lunges forward. And I didn't drive it for very long, and I didn't really like it, if I'm honest. And he said, well, yeah, that's on the lightest setting. You do, in some cases, want the vehicle to freewheel a little bit when you ease off the the
Sure.
throttle. And that was a little difficult. So it's almost like if you want to slow down a little bit, you have to just ease your foot off, off the pedal partially, but not completely, because as soon as you completely remove your foot from the pedal, it lurches forward. I think the engineers are going to get better and better at that in the future.
Give me the gas motor all the way. Without the sound, half of the fun is gone to me.
Yeah, it's just, who would want to go to the drag races if they were all just electric cars? You need that 10,000 horsepower
Yes.
V8 motor hitting you in the chest. Otherwise, it's just not the same. And I think for that reason, motorsports, as we know it, will never die completely. But the electric element just seems to be coming whether people want it or not.
Yeah, real quick, last thing I want to ask you about is what kind of cost does somebody need to expect to attend California Superbike School, and where would they go and sign up and look into this a little further?
Superbikeschool.com. You can go there and read about it, and of course, sign up if you want. We have two totally different price points and products that we provide. The more deluxe 2-day camp. It's 2 days. We provide breakfast, lunch, the motorcycle, all the gear, everything you need. You get a coach who's assigned to you all day, both days, and they only have one other student they're working with. So it's basically semi-private. It's very, very focused and individual. So one coach to 2 students all day long, 2 days. They ride 7 sessions each day. You get to ride the video bike. You get that reviewed. And we keep the students busy all day long. And the people who do it consider it a good value, although it is expensive. It's going to be about $3,000, but it includes the bike. Of course, we provide the gas, we give you fresh tires, etc. Now, there's a single day school, which is a much lower price point, and that'll be one coach for 3 students, and you ride 5 sessions. And if you ride our bike, so if you rent our bike, it'll be about $850. But if you bring your own, it'll be about $650. So 2 different price points, 2 different programs, but the same curriculum.
But totally obtainable for somebody. These new bikes are $16,000, $18,000, for one of these sport bikes. So yeah, that's definitely worth the investment to learn how to ride what you've bought.
Right. And some people, they'll buy a motorcycle and they just want to figure it out themselves, or they've got some help from somebody, maybe a mentor or a friend or whatever. And I get it, how that path of discovery is nice. They want to watch some YouTube videos and get some tips and so on. But once you're actually with a coach and they're working with you and they're specifically watching you, the progress is going to be 10 or 20x. You really are going to get to the bottom of things. And it's just hard sometimes to lay out that money. And I think really what people are worried about is, am I going to spend all this money and not get much out of it? That's really the main concern most people have. And I think if they knew what they were going to get, they'd all just jump right in. And luckily we've got strong word of mouth where people will say, hey, there was a 9-day difference. So people come just on their friend's advice. But that's really the main concern. And I can say with confidence that, yeah, we do deliver what we promise. You do get what you pay for.
And people do not have to go to California to do this. You're traveling all around. I hope to do the school at Barber one day in the future. But you're in all areas of the country.
Yeah, so we've got schools obviously in Southern California, Northern California. We've got it in Las Vegas, Nevada, which is great because it's an easy sell. If you say to your significant other, hey, I'm thinking about doing a motorcycle thing in Las Vegas. What do you say we make a weekend out of it?
Sure.
We go to Virginia, we go to New Jersey, we go to Kentucky, Bowling Green, we go to Birmingham, Alabama. That's Barber in Alabama. We also go to the Northwest, Pacific Northwest, just south of Seattle and Washington. Pennsylvania, a little west of Pittsburgh.
A little bit everywhere. All around the world. But, anybody listen to this, in the United States, you could find a track. If there's a track near you, there's a good chance that you could do this.
Right, right.
And
And we're not the only school in the nation. Of course, we are the largest, and we have been around. Uh, we've trained more riders than anyone else. That doesn't necessarily mean we're the best. We like to think that we're good, but we do have a lot of people that say we're really good, and it's really up to them to decide whether or not we know how to do our job. But we definitely work very hard to make sure that people get the very best service and very best focused care. All of our coaches are paid professionals. None of them are volunteers. They are held to a standard. They are trained, and we have different levels of training for the coaches that they go through. That's equivalent to basically 4 years of college, actually, for a fully trained coach. So we put a lot of attention on quality.
And that's incredible. And if somebody would just put in California Superbike School and YouTube, man, all the testimonials that anybody would need are right there.
Yeah, you'll see a lot of that. And if I'm honest, we're not really heavy on the digital end. We don't spend a whole lot of time working the algorithms and coming up with tons of video content, et cetera, et cetera. We want people to come out and do the school and experience it firsthand. But you can roam around YouTube and like I said, get tips. But the best thing is to get a trained coach riding with you, watching you, and giving you immediate feedback.
Man, Dylan, thank you so much for coming on Unplugged, and all the best to you and all of your trainers in the school. And I definitely hope to participate in the near future.
Excellent.
Thank you so much, Dylan. We see you guys next week here on Unplugged.